Welcome to Week 4, TGIS 311, Maps and GIS. I have this quote from Jim Thatcher that I like to use. As this class moves forward, labs will continue to present you with a series of tasks with little guidance on how to specifically accomplish them. Resources will be references, but the goal is for you to develop your own workflow and problem-solving routines. As you proceed through GIS 311 and possibly 312 and 414 with me, you'll be presented with tasks covering previous work and previous lab and classwork with little guidance. I'm here to help you learn how to be problem solvers and move on from GIS and forming your own processes. Just wanted to make a quick note about conferences you should perhaps look into: the Northwest GIS Association, the Washington GIS Association, and the Esri UC User Conference. And these all have conferences. The links are on the screen for you to utilize. They're also in the PowerPoint. The Northwest GIS Conference is coming up this October. WGISA just had theirs, but if you're enrolled in the GIS certificate, you may want to think about the Dick Thomas Award. We've had many winners come from our program. It's for students. And the Esri conference this year, sometimes 15 to 18,000 people attend in California. It's too late this year. It's coming up. Well, it depends on when the time of the year is, but if it's too late, be sure to check out the online version and then make plans to attend the next time that you were able. Some students attend for free, others end up working there. It's an exceptional experience in California for a week. And my last reminder: when applying for internships or full-time GIS positions, you'll need references. GIS employers will want to hear directly from your professors and other employers as well. Your work group capabilities and assignment submissions are all part of the questions that employers ask when you list faculty as references. In fact, I've not had one recommendation caller ask specifically about grades. Employers ask for positive and negative examples of how students interact with others in the class and in groups, in class attentiveness, class participation, attendance, adherence to submission deadlines, student positives and weaknesses, with a huge emphasis on problem solving, particularly for GIS-related positions. Does the candidate possess problem-solving skills? For example, to resolve issues with ArcPro. Does the candidate have the ability and desire to resolve technical issues? These are questions that I get. This is why we focus on problem solving in the technical GIS courses. And yes, I'm always happy to be on your list of recommendations. I'm just providing this information so you know what types of questions they ask. Be sure to submit Maps of the Day to earn a few bonus points each and every week. You're welcome to do so. I find them very interesting, and it allows others to see what you're starting to recognize in terms of maps and GIS out in the real world. This was a Maps of the Day back in 2016. A map based on Facebook activity. I don't have any of the references of where this information came from, but it's a map that somebody made in regards to Facebook activity on the evening of the 2016 election. Here's a funny meme: what GIS is like in college with super clean data versus what it's like in the real world with messy data. There's a huge difference between Labs X 1 and 2 versus the real world, which we'll get into in Lab 3 and beyond. Right now, you're using clean data It all lines up. It has the same coordinate system and projection. There are no errors in the data. It will work without a huge hassle. In the real world, it gets messy, and you have to clean your data prior to using it. The good news is, in this course, GIS 311, you'll learn how to resolve bad data. Some quick demos that I wanted to make note of. Locked versus unlocked layers. It's the last one on this list right here. In Arc Pro, you can use this little lock button to lock down the map frame or lock down text so that any modifications that you've made stick and you don't change them inadvertently. So be sure to use that lock button if you're happy with how you've set things up. You can always unlock and make modifications, but it prevents you from making inadvertent errors. When working in layouts, you can change the background within the map frame. I can click on the map frame here, and then I'm using this map frame, so within the layout. And then I'll close my attribute table for the time being and select the element. Once I have the element, it'll pop up over here as in the map frame. And from here, you could either process of elimination and cycle through or hover. For example, this is the display, and for the symbol, the background, I can choose a color. Obviously, that's a poor color choice, but I can change the color if I want to make it not white. And that usually adds a nice little feature for appearance. The next quick hint is about changing the transparency of a layer for some reason. If I were to go back to the map and I want to change the transparency, I choose the layer that I'm working with. In this case, it's this layer. And I go to the feature layer, and transparency is right up here. This is a dynamic toolbar. It changes based on what you've clicked. So now I can change this transparency to whatever I'd like. It doesn't make a lot of sense in this instance, but you can use it. And you notice I can start seeing the other layers below it as I change the transparency. Not too useful for lab 2, but it's handy in other labs. Going back to the layout, if I'm working with the legend, and there's a couple things on here. First of all, instead of turning off the legend, which was my next one, I'm going to go with what are the red dots. So within Arc Pro, sometimes you'll get these dots, and I'll zoom in a little bit. So right now the legend has these red dots. This is a horrible legend, by the way. It's just for demonstration purposes. But these 3 dots are not part of the graphic, but they're telling you that there's extra information. So let me reduce this a little bit. Click on the legend and open up the legend, and the red dots go away. So that was telling me that there was more information as part of the legend. Now, for some reason, I want to turn off the legend. Let's say that I had the legend and it's down here, and I want to deal with my layer, and I just want to get rid of the legend for a moment, but I don't want to delete it. I can just turn it off, and the legend disappears. I can very easily turn it back on. So there's a quick little tip. Another quick tip that isn't in the list that I was going to tell you is the title. We do not use the word legend as a title for a legend because everybody knows that this is a legend. So I can uncheck the title, or I can just take away the words. and the words go away. Both ways work. Make sure to not have any spaces in your folder names and file names, of course. But if I stretch this out, this entire path, and notice I'm on list by data source, this entire path does not have any spaces. So there's a path, here's another path with no spaces. Super important. And the file names, of course, do not have any spaces either. And I already showed you the locked versus unlocked layers back here in the layout. So if this legend was perfect, I could simply lock the layer. And now I cannot move that legend and modify it. All I need to do to modify it is to unlock it and then click, and I can move it again and make modifications to it. Whenever working in Arc Pro, it's highly suggested that you use the help. If you hover over the question mark, you'll get information or help. If you click on that question mark, you will get the website that pops up. I'm going to give you a quick demo of that. We'll see how well it works. If I go to geoprocessing, I'm going to pull this away to make it a little bit easier, I hope. In this case, I have the near tool, but let's use the one that was in the image, which was the clip tool. I search for the clip. There's pairwise clip. I can just click on it, and then there's the question mark. The question mark gives me a nice visual to help me figure out what the clip does, to help me decide if that's the right tool. I can also click for more help down here. That will open the web page. You'll notice the web page opens and it's Esri help. Or I can just simply click the question mark and that will open the web page as well. It just opened it again. Notice I have two of them. You can't tell. So each way opened up the help. Now I'm going to pin this geoprocessing pane back to the right side where I like to utilize it. Notice that my mouse was on top of the frame. So as soon as I get my mouse to that spot, I can pin it to the right. This week, you'll be symbolizing gubernatorial and presidential politics, thus the voting from an election, 2008 and 2012. Lab 2 will provide refreshers from Lab XM1, specifically what you learned in terms of directory and file management in Lab X, and then cartography from Lab 1. What we'll be adding in Lab 2 is a little bit of Excel work, some analysis, joining of data, joining spatial data to non-spatial data, or vice versa, non-spatial data to spatial data. You'll be appending some data. You may run into some frustration if you don't follow the directions exactly. There is a requirement to read carefully. And if you do get a little bit lost, be sure to read backwards and forwards a little bit, as that usually will answer any questions that you end up with. Some goals for this week's lecture is to resolve any Lab X or 1 issues, such as let's try to make some perfect snips so that they're very presentable, as presentable enough that we'd put on a poster or a map product. You're going to learn multiple options for cartography. You're going to take Lab 1 and replicate some of those skills in Lab 2. Make sure to not lose your mind. You can do this. Just follow directions, read forward and back, and be sure to use Google, as that will help you figure out any errors or issues you may have. There is an Excel. I have some GIS refresher file differences in a moment. That'll be a separate slide. There will be some Excel refresher skills if you're not a great Excel user. We need to use Excel in GIS, and you'll be using Excel in Lab 2, formulas, etc. There is such thing as spatial and non-spatial data, and to get the non-spatial data on our map, you'll be joining. And that is taking the spatial data and adding the non-spatial components, very simply with a right click and going to joins and relates. In our case, it'll be a join. And you must start with the shapefile or the feature class always, which is the spatial data. So you always start with the spatial data and right click on the spatial data. You'll be might be helpful to use the legacy data import wizards in Excel and save in a 97 to 2003 Excel format. If you're having issues, remember this and make sure you go back to the legacy data import wizards. You can just Google that. It'll explain how to do it. And then you may also want to save in a 97 to 2003 format, which means you'll have an XLS versus an XLSX. It does work in the XLSX and it works very well, but if you're having issues, you may want to go back to the old format so that Pro recognizes it. In every Pro project, what must we do? And that's more of a reminder that there's a document. It starts with utilizing ArcGIS Pro, and it goes on to say in UWT GIS 311 classes, there's a document that will help you. This isn't our exact week, but day or week 2, this information was provided. There's particularly actually about formatting text is a helpful document, the ArcPro terminology guide, but the file I was just speaking of is utilizing ArcPro at UWT. Every time you do a project in GIS technical classes, 311, 312, 414, you will be doing what is described in this class, or this document, which was part of Lab X. So instead of rummaging through Lab X, you can just use this file that is provided to you, I believe, in every module. And a quick hint about the Lab 2 joining. When we do a join, it's in the layer only, and that means that it's not in the data. If we want to use the data later, we have to export the data to seal the join and to create a new layer. So that'll be an example in the quiz, karaoke quiz that we do in class. I won't be demoing that here. That'll be a live demo. A reminder about data. This week you're using just vector data, and there's technically 3 kinds of vector data that you may run into. You probably won't, though, run into any coverage data. That's an old format that nobody uses anymore. I'm going to skip down to the bottom and mention shapefiles. You've been using shapefiles up until this point, and now you'll be moving into what we call feature classes. This diagram or this image shows a GDB, which you'll be using, and a feature data set. You actually won't be using this feature data set yet. You'll just be using the feature classes, so points, lines, and polygons, and they will be housed in the geodatabase. So there won't be this double indent. There'll just be a single indent. These 3 layers will be in the GDB. These coverages were in what was called a coverage data folder, and shapefiles can exist just in a regular Windows folder, but feature classes that are now shown as gray will always be stored in a geodatabase. Sometimes they'll be in a feature data set. We'll learn about those later. But it's important to remember these files stay in a geodatabase of some sort. Here's a focus on the shapefiles. Shapefile data, again, .shape, points, lines, and polygons. They do appear greenish. In Windows, though, they appear to have multiple files with the same name and just a little bit different extensions. For that reason, we cannot just take one of these single files, for example, acorns, and move it or do anything with it. We must always work with all of the files with the same name at once. The other thing I'm trying to demonstrate in this particular slide is this path is the folder example path. For example, this PC has a data folder, an ArcGIS or Teaching GIS folder, the date, the data type, etc. But this line below it is just clicking in that of Windows, and it will tell you the exact same thing. F, this folder, these dates, this folder, this folder. It's the exact same thing. It's just two ways of looking at it. And in Pro, we must look at it in this format. So we're going to get away from this visualization of the folders and go right to the exact path, the data path. And then again, this is right here in a full Windows folder. If I were to click in there, it would appear and look like this row. Some comments about legends. These are some poor, good, and great legends. Some things to pay attention to as you work in labs 2 and beyond. Lab 1 explains how to get a great legend. For example, this legend or this legend in the top right. Moving forward, you have to complete these legends or format these legends on their own, and some things to avoid. For example, underscores. We should not have any underscores in our legend, and using the same symbology for two different layers is ill-advised. This legend is pretty good. It's very large, but it's good. There's no underscores. This has underscores and an extra line, %pov. So this is the % poverty, and the percentages look very nice, but this extra line and the underscores make it a very poor legend. This legend right here in the middle is pretty darn good. Instead of %pov, the author used poverty rate, and has some other layers as well, but you realize there's no underscores. This legend has a lot of errors, underscores, extra line instead of % poverty, it says %pov, and then even worse, there's a bunch of decimals. Be sure to get rid of the decimals, rid of this line when it's unnecessary, and do not have any underscores. In this slide, I'm going to jump into another demo and talk to you about data properties. There's a couple ways to get to data properties. So in Arc Pro, I've got counties WA projected and counties WA. Let's use counties WA projected. So you can't quite see it, but I'll click on properties and a window pops up. Actually, it did pretty well. It showed up on the screen that I'm recording. So shapefile properties, county WA projected. There's a source and then there's indexes. Not much to deal with the index, so we'll focus on source. It tells us the data type, shapefile feature class. So I've been calling them shapefiles versus feature classes a couple slides ago. We'll just call this a shapefile. There's the path to where the shapefile is. It'll tell us the geometry type, which is a polygon, meaning it's vector. And then it tells us if it has coordinates that have a z value or m value. Then there's the extent of the data. In this case, it's telling us the extent and that it's in meters. There's a spatial reference, and we'll be getting into this more in Lab 3. We will be utilizing projected coordinate systems. So in this case, the projected coordinate system is NAD 1983 UTM Zone 10N. The projection was transverse Mercator. Some other items that we would use, we don't talk about some of these. Linear unit is in meters. I already mentioned that. We use, let's see, the spheroid is sometimes good to know, but we don't use it a lot. The geographic coordinate system is NAD 1983. Again, this will be in a different week. For right now, we just are just briefly touching on them, so they ring a bell the next time, next lab when we need to. And then there's these things called domain, resolution, and tolerance. We don't normally get into this type of detail in GIS 311, this course. I'm going to click OK here. Now, if I were to pull up the properties of a shapefile, same thing, this is a shapefile, pull up the properties within from the contents, I'll get some of the same information, but it looks a lot differently. In this case, it's layer properties versus over here, it was shapefile properties. So instead of a shapefile over here, it's now called a layer. So we have layer properties that are very similar because they're virtually the same thing, but they look differently. So there's a general tab, a metadata tab. You'll be filling these in. We'll talk about that later. There's a source tab that talks about the feature class, the extent, which we've already mentioned, the spatial reference, I've already mentioned some of the same information, and then this was the same, domain, resolution, and tolerance. Elevation, the same, selection. Display, I believe, is different. We now have the display tab. Cache, I've never used, to be honest. Don't need to worry about that. There's definition query, time, if there's time related. I've never used range nor indexes. Joins, it'll tell you how it's been joined. If there's been relates, this one doesn't have any relates, so it doesn't tell you. And then page query, I've never used that, if I recall correctly. So just be aware that in the contents, these are layers, and in the catalog, these are data items. In this case, it is a shapefile. Up here in the geodatabase, these are called feature classes. Notice file, geodatabase, feature class. Oh, you can't see that. It's off your page. Let me pull this in. If I hover, this is the geodatabase, file geodatabase, and this is a file geodatabase feature class. So a feature class properties, let me pull it in so you can see it, is very similar to a shapefile properties, although now it's called feature class. And we'll be practicing with these. You'll learn more about them soon. I just wanted to make that distinction. And then in the contents again, these are called layers. If I go to the properties, it's a layer property. Big distinction between the two. This slide discusses features and attributes. Because I'm in the contents, it's a feature. And this item at the bottom here is called an attribute table, or the attributes. I'm going to give you a quick demo on these items in ArcPro. Let me turn on Arc Pro. So selected counties. Let me turn off all of these layers and go to my map and then just turn on the counties layer. Where did that go? Counties projected. So here's, okay, I've got a good, nicely symbolized one instead of that green one. The selected counties, I can go to map, and in my map, I can select. In this case, I'm going to select by rectangle. So I highlight certain counties by drawing a rectangle, and the counties are selected. They also are selected in the attribute table. So let me click here so we can see the gray. And then you can't quite see that. So you can't see because, let me see if I can make it work. Yes, I should. So there's counties projected, attribute table. So another way to do it is just click on the layer and Control T. And it should work, but it doesn't. So we will avoid that. There we go. So now I have the attribute table showing. This attribute table, once I have layers selected, they'll be selected in the table. So this is think of it as a spreadsheet. It's really a database, but this is the attribute information or data about the data, counties projected. So if I select by using a rectangle, right now I have 3 of the 49 counties selected. They're highlighted in blue in the visual, in the map, and they're also highlighted in blue in the table. There's 1, 2, 3. 3. Now, I can see all of them together by just clicking the selected. So now I'm viewing everything that's selected. If I were to add a different one, it would then show 4. So these are selected counties in the visual, the map, and then also in the attribute table. Turning layers on and off, I think you've already done this, but I can turn this layer off and it disappears. Turn this layer on, etc. And then minimize. Whenever I tell you to minimize something, it's clicking this little arrow, and that gives us more space on the left-hand side. I'm keeping this one open because I know I'm working with it at this time. Let me go back to showing all the selected counties, and then I'm also going to clear. So let me hover and find the clear selection. So now I do not have anything selected, which is actually one of my demonstrations that I wanted to talk about, clear selection. Another handy feature is exporting our data. If I wanted to export this shape, I could very easily right-click, Data, Export Features. You'll do that in every single lab. Definitely will do it in Lab 2 and beyond. So that's how I export these features. I'm not going to do it now, but you will do it and do it often, actually. So you're going to get pretty much a duplicate of this layer. So export features, it'll pull up a dialog. You'll be concerned with where it's going, so that this is the output. So the input is what you clicked on. So you're putting the data into this tool, and then the output will be this. So this button will let us choose where the data goes. In this case, it will go to my geodatabase. I'm not going to do it. And then I guess I would provide a name. So I could call this Washington Counties. and then add an underscore, and then maybe give it a number 2, not number sign, but just underscore 2, and then export. And that would, once I click OK, that would export it into my geodatabase where I was telling it to go. If I wanted a table, I would have to come into the table and export this table. To export the table, let me pull this out so you can see it. Put it up top here. Maybe this will help. Okay, so I've only moved that so you could see this pop up. But down here, there'd be an export. And notice I'm exporting a table now, not the feature. So there's a huge difference. Same thing, I give it a name. It goes to a certain location. This is the path where it goes to. Both tools do the same thing. But this, oops, I don't want to press OK. Exporting here will export a table only. Exporting from the contents will export the actual shapes. While this is part of this shape, it isn't the entire thing. This is just a database. So if I do export here, I get a database. If I export over here, I get shapes with the database. Let me pull this back and dock it on the bottom. Notice my pointer had to go to where I wanted it. Concatenation, I won't demonstrate it fully here, but you'll be concatenating fields. For example, you'll be concatenating perhaps a Gov 2008 and a Pres 2008. And I can show you what that'll look like. Let me turn that off and turn on, well, we'll do 08. So there's the layer that you'll end up with. I'm turning on the attribute table. Now I have 2 attribute tables. I'll close one. In this case, there was the same fields, but I concatenated them over here. And I did that by calculating field, I had to pause and save my project because it was running very slowly. Let me try again. Calculate field. Here we go. So the input table is the table, and then you'll see that I've already done it in this field, so it shows what I did. So in this column, this field, GovPres08, GovPres08, I'm adding Gov08 and Pres08, which were back here. Gov08, Pres08. So the first one, Watcom, Dem, Dem. So that would be from Gov08 and Pres08. The result would be Dem, Dem. So if we look in that field, it ended up being Dem, Dem. Concatenate is combining 2 fields together. And that's just one of the many tools that you use in Lab 2 and beyond. Clear selection, I've already done, although I'll show it again. If I selected some counties, go up to the map button, I will choose a rectangle, select some counties, there's a button. If I highlight, clear selection. Concatenation I just did. Join is in the layer, not in the data. When I do a join, I will right click, joins and relate, add join. That join happens only here in the layer. Remember, there are layers and contents. The data is in the catalog. So in order to seal a join, and let's go back and look at this one. Turn off here. If I look at these joins, notice there already is a join. So if I remove the join, it's asking which join I want to remove. So there was a join. I'm going to cancel. But so right now there's a join connected to this layer. In the data, however, this join is not sealed. So I joined this attribute data to this shape data, this that we can see the counties. To make it permanent, I would have to right click, and you can't see it. So let me use one of these. I would have to go to data and export features after the join. And we'll talk about this quite a bit. It's also in lab 2 with explicit directions. But just remember the join is in the layer, not the data. So we'd have to export it to make it permanent in a new layer. Just as a reminder, right now I'm viewing by data source. So my data path is here. I have to stretch that far out to see where the data is stored. All of these are stored in the geodatabase, which is right there. Now, if I were to switch to list by drawing order, all of these layers are now listed the way they are drawn. So this is the upmost layer, and this is the bottommost layer. So if I turn on something above this layer, it's going to cover up the previous layer. So I'm turning these all on, and it's covering them up because they're all in the same spot. These are just different representations of the data. So I can turn them all on or off with that check mark trick, but let's go back to having counties WA projected showing. I forgot to cover the 80% or 70%. 70% attribute table. It's a nifty little trick. If you have a very small screen or small window like I do here, I can change down here in this attribute table to go to, for example, 70%. It's very small text now, but it's much easier to see a lot of info on the screen. And you can always go back to 100%. If you need to look at something in detail, feel free to make it even bigger. And then you can see the numbers very big. It's just an extra feature, not used a lot, but it's handy if you need to. Drawing order data source, I did. Geodatabase, GDB. I've explained that we're now using geodatabases rather than just a folder and shapefiles. And then starting a join, we always start with the shape. So I right click, joins and relate, add join. We would never come down to some data and right click and choose joins and relate. So that's a big X. We don't start with the table. We start with the shape, whatever shape we need. And you'll be starting with counties WA, I believe, in lab 2. Some features and attributes, I've already showed you that they're highlighted in the table and then highlighted on the screen. This just happens to be a point layer. Let's see. Yeah, they're highlighted in both. In this case, it's a line. I have a line highlighted. So here's Pierce County roads. Some of them are highlighted in spatially, and they're also highlighted in the attribute table. So it's reflected in both the visual feature and then the table or the attribute data. And polygons. And this is what I was just showing in the examples in Pro. The attribute table has some very useful information. So I'm going to go back to that and just talk about some of the things that we missed. So let me minimize these so we get as much as we can here. So I'm looking at the attribute table, and let's just go across the top. So within the attribute table, Right now this is GovPres, so let's make it this one. Open the attribute table. So this is the actual data. So notice there's columns. These are fields up and down. Columns are fields. Rows are called cases. So this is a case within the data. Let me deselect by clicking clear. Now that I've stretched this out, I can easily see what each of the buttons is. So going across the top, add adds a field, and it even tells you in the help text, adds a new field to this table. Calculate field. Selection, I can do a select by attributes. So example, in this layer, I can do a new selection where Pres 2008, so that field is equal to DEM. So let's try it. I can apply, and now 30 are selected. So there's 30 selected visually, I believe. Holy cow, that's a lot. 30 are selected visually and also in the table. And I can see all of them separately in the table by just clicking on this button, which we'll get to, which is show selected records. It's just barely being cut off. So let me make it so it works. There we go. Show selected records. But back to the top. Let me clear. Actually, before I clear, let me use this button, which is switch selection. If I hover switch highlighted, it switches the highlighted rows. It also is over here, switch selection. So now I have all the ones that were not selected are now selected. So instead of 30 selected, I have 19 selected. And notice these buttons change if you have something selected. Let me do this. I'm going to clear selection. And again, go back to highlighted. That's why I had this highlighted showing. So there's nothing listed. Okay, so we did add, calculate, select by attributes, zoom to. I can zoom to if I have something selected. So in this case, I have one row selected. It doesn't look like there's anything selected at first look, but there is. And I can click to zoom to and go right to it. So notice this is a very small item and far north of the Puget Sound. So zoom, I can switch again, switch selection, and now everything but this small one was selected. Clear, I could delete once I have something selected, but we don't use that very often, nor do we copy. But they are there if you'd like to use them, if you need to use them. And then on the bottom, we've already used these, but this is show all records in the table, which I'm doing, all 49 in this case. There's 49 counties, or 49 parcels, or not 49 parcels, but 49 parts of counties, I should say. This shows only selected features. If you hover, show select records. Move to the beginning, move to the end of the table. Let me go back. I can move to the end very quickly. It tells you how many are selected. And then there's some filters. I don't really use these that often, but you could use them. You might find a use for them. You could do a certain sort and then clear the sort. Oh, that's one I don't have on my list, but I could sort. So let's find something that's counties are now sorted. Well, W isn't at the beginning of the alphabet. So let me sort ascending. Then now all of the layers are sorted ascending. And just by doing one column, they all get sorted properly. For example, it didn't just sort this column or this field. Everything that went along with it sorted appropriately. So the data does not get messed up. And those are the items I wanted to show you. Let's make Pro back to a little bit bigger size in the window. A couple brief notes. This is good white space for working on the lab. I would not work on the lab with the map being so small. It's very hard to see. So easy to remedy that. Notice mine is very small, but it almost has to be because I don't have very much in the way of north and south. I guess I could make it a little bit bigger. I could always, of course, right click and zoom to layer, but I'm restrained by the top and the bottom. If I make the bottom bigger and then sort again, or excuse me, zoom to layer, now it's bigger because there's more room top to bottom. So this is a good working view. You will have a karaoke quiz too. That is a karaoke quiz that prepares you for Lab 2. Won't be done in this PowerPoint or this lecture because it is a in-class item, but we will do these items. Exporting shapes versus tables. I already talked about that. Catalog versus window view within the project. Opening a DBF with Excel. That's a database format or database file. With Excel, we'll be creating some Excel formulas in Excel, of course. So you'll be using these. Paste values. Notice down here, we'll be using this often. We don't want to paste formulas because it will mess up our data. So most of the time, we'll be pasting values. We do sometimes repeat formulas, in which case we will copy and paste. But for the most part, dealing with our data, we're going to post values. We'll be utilizing Windows, Excel, and Pro in Lab 2, and I'll do some demos there. And then joining data, spatial data versus attribute data, or spatial versus a table. Lab 2 in a nutshell, if I were to just tell you what you were doing. In Windows, you're going to create a couple folders, although you could do it all in Pro. Firefox, you'll be downloading data and the directions. We'll use Windows to extract our data. We will definitely have to use Windows for that. In Pro, you'll set up your project. You'll export a DBF, which is a database file or database format. In Excel, you'll open the DBF, remove duplicates, special tool in Excel, create some formulas, paste special, and prepare a worksheet that is part of your Excel workbook. Two different key terms there. In Pro, you're going to join using a new unique key. Remember a review from earlier in this lecture to always start with the shapefile and then grab the table data, tabular data, and then create some more layers and symbolize 8 different layers of data. And then wrap it up, zip it, and submit it. You'll also do a little bit of cartography. Your catalog at the end of Lab 2 will look something like this. So you may want to save this, making yourself aware of how much data you'll be creating. You'll only be starting off with a few shapefiles and an Excel document or two, but you'll end up with a bunch of feature classes. You will have multiple maps, as you see up here. Databases, I already mentioned, and folders. Be sure to remember the difference between the directory and the project. The raw data is alongside the project and within the directory. So when you're clicked on directory, you should see a project folder and a raw data folder. Lab 1 bonuses we will have gone over in class. Just remember, I'm mentioning Lab 1 bonus. Remember, you agree to have it being shared and shown so that we can all learn from it. It's not a bad thing to have corrective feedback. Don't take it as embarrassing. Take it as a learning opportunity. Everybody makes mistakes. We'll be talking about any and all mistakes in the Lab 1 bonus and Lab 2, etc. moving forward. By the way, Lab 1 bonus was one of the easiest bonuses of GIS 311, and they were well done. This week, when working on Lab 2, keep an eye on Canvas so you know what is due. You'll be completing Lab 2 on your own, and I'll be helping you problem solve. You have plenty of time to complete it. Many times it gets completed in class. It's, of course, due 11:59 the day prior to the next class. That's when we have one class a week. Summers are a little different. There's an extra lab day in summers. So it's not due before the next lab day. It's due before the next lecture day. So just a heads up to summer students. You're going to be submitting a write-up, a PDF, a zip, and a post-quiz, and most likely a bonus for Lab 2. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, perhaps 5 submissions for Lab 2, at least 4 to complete everything. If you don't finish it in class, then finish it for homework. And then don't forget the Lab 3 preparatory work and online quizzes. Online quizzes do not have any grace periods, so make sure to take care of them before the next class. And in class, I'll remind you of this, but before you leave, please sign out and off the computers, restart computers, and bring your name tents up front. The Easter candy is to remind us not to leave the default colored pastel Easter maps. Be sure to change them. From the default, Esri never picks a good color. Well, I guess maybe once in a while they do, but normally they don't. Make sure to make informed choices of your symbology. I will be in class until 8:30 or when the last person leaves, whichever comes first. I'm happy to stay until the very end and help anyone and everyone who'd like some assistance in problem solving when you run into an issue with the labs. And that is the end of week 4 lecture. Feel free to go to the discussion boards, ask questions. I look forward to seeing all of you in class as we work on Lab 2.